What's up? Welcome back to episode 10 of Hike and Spike, the podcast that stops the clock and gives you coverage on the latest NFL trends, games, and news. This is our first off-season podcast as the Super Bowl just finished, but this episode will reminisce on the rookies we've seen this year, and we will be redrafting the 2020 NFL Draft. But first, we need to go to trivia, and this is episode 10, which is something special. So considering we're in episode 10, moving into trivia, we are actually in a really close battle in trivia. In fact, Andy is currently in the lead with 110 points. I am tied with Rohan in second place with 100 points. However, I cannot get any more points in our first season of trivia because I am the host for this episode. So basically, the way this works is whoever gets last out of us three after 10 episodes will have to do a forfeit, which will either be decided by us or someone in the comments if you are so thoughtful as to put it there. So this theme for this final week will be about the draft. Are you guys ready? Question 1. This is probably the toughest one I have there. Since 1936, what team has chosen number 1 overall in the draft the most? Option A, the Dolphins. Option B, the Bucks. Option C, the Colts. Or option D, the Bears. Andrew with the first response.
Okay, I have no clue. My strategy is pick the team that I know has at least existed for that whole period, so they have the best chance of having the most first overall picks. So I guess the Bears.
Good guess, but unfortunately, that's not the right answer. Rohan?
Can you repeat my options?
Dolphins, Bucks, and Colts.
I don't know how long the Bucks or Colts have lasted, but I know the Dolphins have been there for a while. They had a lot of winning seasons with Dan Marino, but I hope they didn't have too many winning seasons because I'm going with the Dolphins.
That's actually incorrect. You guys actually picked the third and fourth most amongst these four. It was actually the Bucks who had 5, but the Colts, including the time when they were in Baltimore, had 7 number 1 overall draft choices. And that's actually standing well ahead, multiple ahead of the second place Bucks. It's a very interesting question. But now we go to a much easier question. Out of these schools, which had the most players selected in the 2020 NFL Draft? Note, there is no LSU on here. A, Florida. B, Clemson. C, the Ohio State University. And D, Alabama. Andy with the first response.
Once again, my knowledge of this is not particularly great, but I'm just gonna guess Alabama because they seem to have like a lot every year.
Yeah, I did something a little interesting here. I gave A, B, C, D. It's specifically in that order. There was 1 player from Florida, 2 from Clemson, 3 from Ohio State, and 4 from Alabama. So that is correct, Andy. As you move up 20 on us. Let's move to question 3. Which of these NFL teams do not have a first round pick in the 2021 NFL Draft? Option A, the Seahawks. Option B, the Bears. Option C, the Patriots. Or option D, the Browns. And Andy with the first response.
Okay, I've done like a first round mock draft before, and I just don't remember seeing like the Seahawks anywhere there. So I just guessed them, but maybe I'm just blanking.
And the Seahawks is the correct response. It was part of the Jamal Adams trade. So that's actually going to the Jets. And Rohan needs to get one of these last 2 questions, unless we're going to have a tiebreaker from Andy between us two. As we move on to question 4. Devonta Smith won the Heisman this past year as a wide receiver. Before him, who was the last non-quarterback to win the Heisman? A, Reggie Bush. B, Derrick Henry. C, Christian McCaffrey. Or D, Mark Ingram. Rohan with the first response.
Gotta be Derrick Henry.
And that is the correct answer. Derrick Henry won it in 2015. As you move on to the last question, which running back was drafted in the first round? A, Derrick Henry, B, Dalvin Cook, C, Nick Chubb, or D, Todd Gurley? Andy, actually, Rohan with the first response.
Okay, I forgot the players you mentioned. I know Dalvin Cook was not drafted in the first round. He was a second round pick. Derrick Henry was not drafted in the first round. I forget who you mentioned third.
It was
But
Nick Chubb.
yeah, I'm pretty sure Nick Chubb wasn't a first round pick. He may have been, but it was just between Nick Chubb and Todd Gurley. But I'm pretty sure Gurley was a first round pick, so I wanted to do Gurley.
And you end on a roll. It was Todd Gurley who was drafted, I think, 10th overall. So that wraps it up. Both of you got 2 questions correct, which puts the final score as me in last place with 100, Rohan in second with 120, and our champion of season 1, Andrew, with 130 fantasy points. Not fantasy points, trivia points. But now we move on into our main segment. Andy, take it away.
All right, so now we have the main segment where we are going to be redrafting the 2020 NFL Draft. We're just going to be doing the first 20 picks, so that's the all the teams that didn't make the playoffs. And I'm going to start with the first pick, which was the Bengals. They originally took Joe Burrow, and all of us agreed that they should still take Joe Burrow. Even though this year Justin Herbert did win the Offensive Rookie of the Year award and was the better player, a large part of that was just due to Joe Burrow's injury, obviously, and I still think Joe Burrow has the higher ceiling out of the two.
Yeah, I think might be quite surprising, but I think that just because of the amount of weapons which Herbert has on the Chargers team, also it just played a factor. And just look at the talent. I think Burrow still is the right pick. Moving on to the second overall pick, the Washington football team originally took Chase Young, and we have them again taking Chase Young. So the first 2 picks are the exact same. Chase Young was a stellar defensive player. He made the Pro Bowl. And he was Defensive Rookie of the Year. And I think he overall had a really good season alongside Montez Sweat in the Washington football team defense. He basically carried the offense to an extent to the playoffs in the worst division in the NFL. I personally think that they had more pressing issues on the offensive end and should have taken a quarterback. So I might have considered taking Justin Herbert here, but I think our consensus was Chase Young was the right pick.
The third pick went to the Detroit Lions. They ended up picking Jeff Okudah, a corner from Ohio State who didn't play that well. He still has potential, but it was just not a good season for him. We all ultimately went with Justin Jefferson for this pick. Even though wide receiver may not be the biggest positional need, it is a great value pick to have a player like Justin Jefferson that's still available on the board. He's already shown that he's one of the best players, even though he's a rookie at his position. But given that a lot of wide receivers want out now that Matthew Stafford is gone, because Marvin Jones has publicly said that, and Kenny Galladay is a free agent and he's probably not going to return to Detroit, this may seem like a positional need, but the Lions still have a very bad defense that they need to address. So we could see this pick going to another player like Jeremy Chin, who's another positional need, but we had to go with Justin Jefferson.
Yep, and next, my Giants took Andrew Thomas with the 4th overall pick. Now, there was definitely a lot of criticism of this pick, and he actually did start off fairly poorly, but ended up progressing, and probably wasn't the best tackle this year, but definitely wasn't a terrible pick. But we all agreed that the better pick would have been Tristan Wirfs. He was actually selected by the Bucks, and that Bucks O-line was just magnificent this year. They protected Brady extremely well, and that's what allowed him to win a Super Bowl in the end. I could have actually seen this pick being Justin Herbert as well, just because of how good he was this year. I know Daniel Jones is still decent, but I think Justin Herbert was definitely better.
With the 5th pick, the Dolphins originally took quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. we have them taking another quarterback, Justin Herbert. Now, he was considered the more wild card pick amongst the two. Tua was generally more safe, even though he was a bit more injury prone. Justin Herbert was a wild card coming out of Oregon, not having too much competition, but also doing really well in the Senior Bowl. But he had a very stellar season for the Chargers to start off and ending up taking them to a 7-9 record. Even though he blew many close games, he showed that he was a very important piece, and he being able to have such leads on such dominant teams, such the Kansas City Chiefs, proves that he is going to be a star for years to come, especially with that offense.
Next pick, 6th overall, went to the Chargers. They picked Justin Herbert, which is one of the best picks in this whole draft from any team. But in this mock draft, because Justin Herbert was already taken, we had to go with Tua. Quarterback was already a very big positional need with the Chargers, with Phillip Rivers leaving in the offseason and Tyrod Taylor being the only other major quarterback. Tua Tagovailoa, he'd had some good games this season. Against the Bills, he had 1 touchdown and 3 interceptions, and he showed that he wasn't really that good against a really strong defense. But if you look at the rest of the season, he played pretty well, and he ended with 11 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. He didn't really have a big chance to play because it was always like he was in the shadows of Ryan Fitzpatrick, and he didn't have a big chance to play by himself. So even though he wasn't that good right now, we can see him developing into a really good quarterback in the future.
All right, and then with the next pick, we had the Panthers, who took Derek Brown originally. We actually all agreed again that they should take Jeremy Chin, who was actually their second round pick. But out of the two, Jeremy Chin was definitely the better player this year. He was in the conversation for Defensive Rookie of the Year. He was actually my pick for Defensive Rookie of the Year, even though Chase Young did end up winning it. But I think that Jeremy Chin was definitely super impressive and deserved this pick.
Next, we go to the 8th pick, which was the Cardinals, who originally took Isaiah Simmons, I believe. So this time we have them protecting Kyler Murray with a great selection. The combines, I guess the combine baby, you could call him, Mekhi Becton, who originally went 11 to the Jets. I think just Kyler Murray really needed more protection. He could have had more time to throw the ball, more time to choose to run. I think just giving him more protection is something which they needed. Although it was a good pick, which they had, I think having Mekhi Becton was still pretty, would be a much better step for them, and they could have made the playoffs.
At 9th, the Jaguars took CJ Henderson, a cornerback from Florida. He was really good this season, but there were still some better players on the board given our current mock draft, and that's why we had to pick Jeff Okudah here. As I said before, even though CJ Henderson was good, it's just too good of a value to have Jeff Okudah taken at this position. Even though Okudah wasn't the best this season, we saw his potential in college, and he was still really good. So we think even though this year was bad for him, he was going to develop into a better player next season. And there's no disrespecting in CJ Henderson because he played really well, but Okudah was just the right pick here.
I actually disagreed with the consensus. I went with Antoine Winfield here. I think that having a player like him who is just all over the place, you saw him, especially even in the playoffs, do extremely well. I think his performance on a defense like the Jags, which really needs a lot of help back there, it could use a lot of help. So I think Antoine Winfield's another option here.
All right, the next pick was the Browns, who ended up taking Jedrick Wills. And the consensus was that they should still take Jedrick Wills. We saw how great their offensive line was this year with players like Wyatt Teller, Joel Bitonio, and Jedrick Wills as well. Their rushing game was just unbelievable with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. So I think this was the right pick.
I think Jedrick Wills is a good pick. I think they could have also used some help on the secondary with, or at the linebacker with Patrick Queen. But I think Wills is also a good pick for the running game. At 11, we have the Jets, who originally took Becton, but Becton is already gone. So we have them taking a wide receiver, so they're not stuck trying to throw the Jamison Crowder all the time. We have them taking CeeDee Lamb pretty much a consensus that he was the second best wide receiver in the NFL draft. He did really well, even with the at least 4 different quarterbacks who were on the Cowboys, including the GOAT Ben DiNucci. But like, yeah, CeeDee Lamb definitely was really good and could help out a struggling quarterback like Darnold, especially for the future. There's a lot of places the Jets could improve, but I think wide receiver is where we ultimately agreed that they could improve the most.
12th pick went to the Raiders, and they selected Henry Ruggs. This was a pretty good pick, but there were some better players available, so that's why we went with Patrick Queen to address the defensive need. The Raiders already have decent linebackers, but there's always some place to improve. Their safeties are decent, and they do need better corners more than they need better linebackers, but there just weren't any good value corners compared to Patrick Queen, so we just had to go with Patrick Queen. So yeah, that's it.
All right, and then next we had the Bucks. They took Tristan Wirfs, which was an excellent pick. He is already off the board for that reason, actually. So we actually have them taking a player who they took later in the draft, and that's Antoine Winfield. We saw how great he was as a rookie this season, also in the conversation for defensive rookie of the year. But I think he would be a good first round pick. I personally had them taking Andrew Thomas just because they proved this year how important the offensive line was. And I think they still needed that help. So I went with Andrew Thomas.
Next, we have Rohan and my favorite team, the San Francisco 49ers, who originally at this pick took Javon Kinlaw. They traded DeForest Buckner for the pick earlier and then traded back one spot with the Bucks in order to go to 14. It made sense at the time to go D tackle for D tackle. And we have them continuing to support the trenches by taking a person who originally went, I think, number 7 overall, Derek Brown. Many people as the 49ers were a bit upset they didn't go wide receiver, considering there was clear top 3 wide receivers. But instead of going with the 3rd best wide receiver, we have them going with a person who can help them a lot in the trenches. Even though there were a lot of injuries, which they ended up sustaining, I think that adding another piece could be amazing for their future run games in the future.
The next pick went to the Denver Broncos, and at 15th, they selected Jerry Jeudy. This is by no means a bad pick. He was actually very good this season, but he had a lot of drops. But given his quarterback and his other offensive situations, it was still a very good season for him. But there are just better players on the board. And one major positional need for the Broncos is the corner, because a lot of their corners are very old or they're going to be free agents in the offseason, which is why they need to invest in a really talented young corner right now. And we ultimately went with CJ Henderson. He played really well this season, and it's just a great value pick at 15th in our mock draft.
All right, the next pick went to the Atlanta Falcons. They took AJ Terrell here, and we agreed that they should still take a defensive player. But that player is Isaiah Simmons. He's obviously fallen down the board from where he was taken in the actual draft, largely because the Cardinals didn't actually utilize him very effectively this year. But we think he would be a great pick for the Falcons, considering other issues on the defensive side of the ball.
With the next pick, the Dallas Cowboys took CeeDee Lamb, but he is off the board at this point because he was amazing for them. Instead, we saw how that their defense was actually way more terrible than people thought that it was, and they ended up allowing so many points throughout and losing games. Even Dak was healthy because of that terrible defense. So we have them addressing it by taking the corner from the Kansas City Chiefs, L'Jarius Sneed. So that helped, especially what you saw from him. He looked like a vet out there in some plays, making some great reads and being able to keep up with some of the best wide receivers in the game. So I think the Cowboys would desperately hope for a guy like Sneed. So we have the Cowboys taking L'Jarius Sneed.
The next pick went to the Miami Dolphins, and at 18th, they selected Austin Jackson, an offensive tackle. Austin Jackson was okay this year. He only had a PFF grade of 52.4, which is very bad, in case you didn't know how PFF grades work. He allowed 4 sacks, which is just not good, and he played decently for the rest of the season. Andrew Thomas and Michael Onwenu were our main options here, But given that the Dolphins need an offensive tackle and not an offensive guard, we have to go with Andrew Thomas. Even though Andrew Thomas did not play well at the beginning of the season, he significantly improved towards the end, posting really great statistics. But the Dolphins really need protection for Tua, and we had to go with Andrew Thomas.
Right, and with the penultimate pick of our draft, we had the Raiders. They originally took Damon Arnett. We have them still taking a corner, but our pick was Jalen Johnson, who is excellent this year. And I believe the other choice we had was also Brandon Ayuk. But I think on the offensive side of the ball, they're stronger than on defense. So we went with a corner.
And finally, with our last pick in our 20 pick redraft, we have the Jaguars, who originally at the spot took Caleb Chason, who honestly hasn't really made much of a name for himself. Also, it's Jacksonville, who was just terrible as a whole this year. So we thought that just get best player available on the offensive side. You can address the defense. There's some remaining remnants of that amazing Jaguars team defense, which is there, even though they traded most of those players. There's still remnants of that defense there. So on offense, getting them another good wide receiver, so they aren't just like solely relying on players like they end up taking like Chenault and a couple others. So we have them taking Brandon Ayuk, who was originally taken by the 49ers a few picks later. This is for a couple of reasons. Even though Ayuk didn't play the full season, he definitely showed potential as a wide receiver one on an injured 49ers team. And even there's games where he played alongside vets and players who were really good for the 49ers last season, like Deebo Samuel, and he still showed that he was, if anything, better. So he definitely has a lot of potential, can work with quarterbacks of any type. It's a great route runner, got good speed, everything you would want in a wide receiver, and he has translated to the NFL game extremely well.
All right, so that wraps it up for our 2020 NFL redraft. Let us know which picks you agreed with and which ones you disagreed with. This is the Benchwarmers signing off. See ya.